Welcome back to Wide Angle. Today we are discussing the implications of President Obama's recent visit to 4 Asian countries. We were talking about rising security concerns in Japan and the expansion of their defense budget. So Dr. Rajagopalan, if I may start with you, how do you see Japanese defense budget and the new definitions that Prime Minister Abe has given to the idea of collective self-defense? How do you see that impacting the region?
Obviously, the Japanese have always kept their defense budget under 1% of the GDP, but the very fact that they have a rising economy, their larger size of the economy means that there is a larger share. So in realistic terms, when you look at it, the budget figures are actually going up in the defense budget. And this is obviously given the kind of concerns from North Korea as well as the Chinese military expansion and the growing assertiveness of the Chinese with regard to Senkaku Islands. And there has been a series. So even as the U.S. credibility of the U.S. credibility to them as a security guarantor has been reassured by the Chinese by the current visit, and even a month back you had Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel's visit, and so on and so forth. But there has been still a lot of wariness and apprehension as to how this is going to translate, because I think they have a logistic issue in practical terms. If there is a missile that is going to be fired from North Korea, it is going to take a few seconds before it lands on the Japanese shore. So they have a practical difficulty of how to address this particular issue. They do not enjoy the luxury of waiting for a US response and then do something about it. So in a sense, they have to measure up their own security. They have to beef up their own security measures to address some of these practical issues in that sense.
So would it be fair to say that Prime Minister Abe certainly today feels that Japan is much more on the front line than perhaps was the case 20 years ago or 30 years ago?
I would think so, and to a great extent, the US will sort of overlook whatever is kind of taking place. For instance, the internal debate about amending the Constitution, Article 9 debate, has been kind of picking up within the domestic context. There are some issues within the in the public domestic context that should the Japanese be militarizing? Should they go about such measures? But at the same time, the very fact that you have such open debates about these issues, potential nuclearization at some point of time in the future, should there be a major conflict between China and Japan on the Senkaku Islands, that possibility cannot be ruled out. I'm not saying, especially after the Fukushima crisis, there is a lot of opposition even to running the civil nuclear power plants. So nuclear weaponization is several steps away. But at the same time, the very fact that you have open public debates about these issues within Japan, I think it's an indication that there are things that are being contemplated along those such lines. And also the another aspect of the diplomatic aspect, when you look at it, even as the US remains the cornerstone of their security and so on and so forth, they are also building on new partnerships, new friendships in Asia. And India-Japan partnership in that sense is very important aspect.
We will come to that in a moment. But Professor Mahapatra, let's take another country which also has a bilateral security agreement with the United States, which was part of this visit, which is the Philippines. Now, in Philippines, there was an enhanced defense cooperation agreement which was signed. And for those of us who have followed this area and this relationship with some interest, it is only in 1992 that the largest US naval base in the region, namely at Subic Bay, was closed down and the Americans had to leave. So it is interesting that 22 years later, there is already the beginning of a renewed defense cooperation. What do you attribute this to? Is it because of concerns on China? Is it because of concerns regarding Japan? Is it because of concerns regarding North Korea? What are the basic driving factors behind this?
You know, there are a lot of contradictions and dilemmas in the region. The reason the Americans want to go back to the Philippines and the Filipinos are welcoming the Americans with open arms is because of the tension between the Filipinos and the Chinese on Mischief Reef.
So once again we see the China factor.
Yes, Scarborough and all. But 2 or 3 critical points which have linked with this when Obama went to Japan, he very categorically said that although the US has no position on the sovereignty issue, Japan de facto controls the islands, and in case there is a clash with the Chinese, the defense treaty with Japan will be invoked. In South Korea, again, another categorical statement saying that in case there is an attack from North Korea, the USA, quote unquote, will protect South Korea.
Yes.
And why is he saying this? It is because my hunch is this: Americans are worried about North Korea. They know very well that unless this kind of assurances are given to South Korea and Japan, they may be forced in a way, induced in a way to go nuclear. Because ultimately they have to protect themselves, and as Rajeswari was saying, keep on waiting for America to come and help them. So in order to dissuade Japan and South Korea from even thinking along these lines, this assurance was important.
So the nuclear umbrella, what you are saying is that these assurances were more spelt out in Japan and South Korea in order to reiterate the importance of the nuclear umbrella.
But the difference is this: he goes to Japan and he says, on Senkaku Island, we are with you if there is a war. He goes to South Korea and only talks about North Korea and not China. In case of the Philippines, which was a former defense partner, not a word about Scarborough, not a word about Mischief Reef. He simply says that we are going to sell more weapons, we want to come back to it. But the two largest overseas bases, one you mentioned Subic, the other one is Clark Air Force Base, which is closed down. Actually, those bases cannot be reopened and reused in the same manner. The Americans don't need those because of changed circumstances, new technology, and etc. But what they're asking for is access to those bases and other facilities as and when they want it. And the Filipinos think that this is going to give them some kind of deterrence against the Chinese. But I doubt personally very much whether the Americans are going to take a position on territorial disputes between China and others. Only in the recent past, the Secretary of State would go to Beijing and say that we have no position on the sovereignty issue. The Defense Secretary would go to Tokyo and say, we are with you because you are a de facto controller of that particular island. Giving this kind of ambiguous statements. But Obama made it very clear that we are with you. And these assurances are important because of both China as well as North Korea.
This brings me to the South China Seas issue, where we see a dispute not just between two countries, but more. So we've got China, we've got Taiwan, we've got Philippines, we've got Vietnam, we've got Malaysia, and we've got Brunei. And so it is interesting that Obama's visit covers 4 of the countries who are involved in the South China Seas dispute. What is the message that the South China Seas dispute, what is the message on that? Because we saw that China has been much more assertive about this 9-dashed line, which now is there on Chinese maps and is being objected to by the other 4 countries.
But see the difference. The Americans are so smart. They are taking a very confusing position on South China Sea. For instance, on the ADIZ, when the Chinese declared it, immediately 2 B-52 bombers jumped past. Everybody knows that flying a military aircraft is not violation of international law. And then immediately after that, they told the American airlines that, okay, you abide by what the Chinese want and all that. This kind of conflicting signals and all. But the difference is this: China is saying that all these disputes are bilateral. Americans are now pushing that no, there has to be a multilateral solution to this problem. The Chinese don't agree. And very fascinatingly, in 1974, soon after the Americans declared that in Paris that they are withdrawing from Vietnam War, it was in 1974 after the Americans began to withdraw, they captured Paracel Islands. Now, soon after Obama's return to Washington DC on 29th April, now the Chinese are ramming the Vietnamese ships.
Yes, which happened just a few days ago. We will come back to this in a moment after another short break.